You might want to call your supervisor before you do this, the older man said quietly. Officer Ryan Mitchell almost laughed when he heard it. He had heard similar lines before during traffic stops across the county. Some people mentioned lawyers. Others mentioned politicians. A few claimed to know someone important. None of it ever changed anything. The flashing patrol lights painted red and blue reflections across the dark highway as Ryan stood beside an aging pickup truck parked on the shoulder. The truck looked like it had survived decades of hard work. Faded paint covered the body. Dust clung to the wheel wells. The driver behind the wheel looked equally ordinary. Marcus Walker, a 57-year-old black man wearing a worn denim jacket and a faded military cap, sat calmly with both hands visible on the steering wheel. That calmness bothered Ryan more than he wanted to admit. Most drivers showed some sign of frustration when they were stopped. Marcus looked as if he were waiting for a bus. The evening air carried the scent of rain from distant clouds gathering beyond the tree line. Cars passed every few seconds, their headlights cutting through the darkness before disappearing down the highway. Ryan glanced at the documents in his hand. License, registration, insurance. Everything appeared valid. Yet something about the situation continued nagging at him. Earlier, a highway camera alert had briefly flagged Marcus's truck before clearing itself almost immediately. The notification had vanished so quickly that Ryan could not even read the full message. Still, it was enough to make him curious. Curiosity had turned into suspicion. Suspicion had led to the stop. Why would I need to call my supervisor? Ryan asked. Marcus looked through the windshield toward the road ahead. You probably do not. His voice remained calm. I just thought you might want to. Ryan frowned. The answer felt strange. Not threatening. Not arrogant. Just unusual. He studied Marcus more carefully. The older man showed no signs of nervousness. No anger. No urgency to leave. It was almost as though he already knew how the night would unfold. A gust of wind rattled nearby highway. Signs. Ryan handed back the registration but kept the driver's license. Where are you headed tonight? Marcus answered immediately. Home. From where? A friend's house. Ryan nodded slowly. The responses were straightforward. Too straightforward. Behind him, another vehicle passed and briefly illuminated the scene. For a split second, the light reflected off something attached to the dashboard of Marcus's truck. Ryan could not tell what it was. By the time he looked again, the interior had returned to shadow. Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle? Ryan asked. Marcus paused for a moment before opening the door. He moved carefully and stood beside the truck. The military cap sat low on his forehead. The denim jacket looked old but clean. His posture was relaxed. Confident. Not the confidence of someone trying to impress people. The confidence of someone who had already experienced things far more difficult than a roadside traffic stop. Ryan noticed it immediately. Across the highway, a family pulling a camper slowed slightly as they passed. Inside the rear seat, a young girl pressed her face against the window and watched the flashing lights. The scene looked ordinary to everyone else. A police officer conducting a traffic stop. Nothing more. Yet somewhere inside a government office nearly 200 miles away, an alert had just appeared on a screen. A name. A vehicle registration. A location. The person reading it sat upright immediately. Within seconds, another phone began ringing. Then another. Back on the highway shoulder, Ryan remained unaware of any of it. He looked at Marcus and folded his arms. Marcus simply looked back at him, calm as ever, while dark clouds drifted slowly across the night sky. Ryan Mitchell kept his eyes on Marcus Walker as another stream of headlights moved past on the highway. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the side of the old pickup truck, creating waves of red and blue against the faded paint. Most drivers would have been impatient by now. Most would have asked why they were still standing there. Marcus did neither. He simply waited. That calmness continued bothering Ryan. Experience had taught him that people usually revealed something about themselves under pressure. Some became defensive. Some became nervous. Some became angry. Marcus seemed untouched by the situation. The older man stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, occasionally looking toward the road as if he had nowhere urgent to be. Ryan glanced down at the driver's license once more. Marcus Walker. 57 years old. Address listed nearly 70 miles away. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet Ryan could not shake the feeling that he was missing something. How long have you owned this truck? Ryan asked. Marcus looked toward the vehicle and smiled faintly. Long enough to know every noise it makes. It looks old. That is because it is old. Ryan almost smiled but stopped himself. The answer sounded sincere. For a moment silence settled between them. The wind carried the distant scent of wet asphalt as dark clouds continued gathering overhead. Somewhere far down the highway, thunder rolled softly. Ryan walked around the truck once more. He examined the tires, the license plate, the rear bumper. Nothing stood out. No violations. No obvious reason for concern. Yet he still felt unwilling to end the stop. Across the county, inside a traffic monitoring center, 2 employees sat staring at a computer screen. One of them leaned closer. There it is again. The alert had returned. Only briefly. The same vehicle registration. The same name. Then it disappeared once more. The younger employee frowned. Should we report it? The older employee was already reaching for the phone. Back on the roadside, Ryan noticed something attached near the center of the dashboard inside Marcus's truck. It appeared to be a small metal emblem. He could not make out the details from where he stood. What is that on your dashboard? Marcus followed his gaze. A reminder. Of what? Marcus paused. People I served with. Ryan nodded slowly. Veteran. The military cap suddenly made more sense. Yet plenty of veterans drove across American highways every day. It explained some things but not the strange alert. Another patrol vehicle passed in the opposite direction. The officer inside glanced toward Ryan before continuing down the road. Marcus watched the patrol car disappear. You seem concerned about something, he said. Ryan crossed his arms. Maybe. Do you know what it is? The question caught him off guard. Ryan opened his mouth but did not answer immediately. The truth was uncomfortable. He did not know. Not exactly. He only knew that his instincts kept telling him to stay. A radio crackled from inside the patrol car. Ryan turned toward it. The dispatcher was calling his unit. He stepped away from Marcus and opened the driver's door. Unit 12, confirm current location. Ryan picked up the microphone. Highway 41 near mile marker 82. There was a brief pause. Longer than normal. Then the dispatcher spoke again. Remain on scene. Ryan frowned. Copy. Another pause followed. Additional instructions may be coming. The transmission ended. Ryan slowly lowered the microphone. Additional instructions. The phrase echoed inside his head. Dispatchers rarely spoke that way during routine traffic stops. He stepped back out of the patrol vehicle and looked toward Marcus. The older man appeared unsurprised. If anything, he seemed almost thoughtful. Everything okay? Marcus asked. Ryan studied him carefully. That depends. Marcus nodded once. Fair enough. The highway lights stretched into the distance like a ribbon of white stars. Above them, thunder rumbled again beyond the clouds. Somewhere, phones continued ringing between offices Ryan did not even know existed. And while he stood on the shoulder believing he was uncovering a mystery, forces far beyond his understanding had already begun moving toward their location. The rain still had not arrived, but the air felt heavier with every passing minute. Marcus Walker remained beside his pickup truck while Officer Ryan Mitchell stood near the patrol car pretending to review information he had already checked twice. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions beneath the darkening sky. Vehicles continued passing, yet several drivers slowed as they approached the flashing lights. Human curiosity was difficult to resist. A family towing a small camper eventually pulled into a gravel turnout nearly 100 yards away. They remained inside their vehicle, watching from a distance. Among them was the young girl who had pressed her face against the window earlier. She continued observing the scene with the focused attention only children seemed capable of. Marcus noticed the camper parked nearby and smiled faintly. Ryan noticed it too. Looks like we are becoming a roadside attraction, Marcus said. Ryan did not smile. People should keep driving. People rarely do what they should. The answer lingered between them. Ryan looked away. The older man had a habit of saying simple things that somehow felt larger than the conversation itself. Another radio transmission crackled through the patrol vehicle. Ryan immediately turned toward it. He expected another routine update. Instead, the dispatcher asked him to confirm his location for a second time. That almost never happened. Still at mile marker 82, Ryan answered. A pause followed. Then the dispatcher thanked him and ended the call without further explanation. Ryan lowered the microphone slowly. The uncertainty was beginning to irritate him. He walked back toward Marcus. You seem remarkably patient. Marcus glanced toward the dark horizon. Patience comes easier when you spend enough years waiting. Waiting for what? Ryan asked. Orders. News. Loved ones. Answers. Sometimes all four at once. Ryan folded his arms. Veteran. The word kept returning to his mind. There was something about Marcus that felt familiar even though they had never met. The calm posture. The steady eye contact. The absence of fear. It reminded Ryan of older soldiers he had encountered during community events over the years. Men who had learned long ago that panic rarely improved a situation. Across the highway, the little girl finally spoke to her mother. Ryan could not hear the conversation, but he saw her pointing toward Marcus. A moment later, the mother smiled and said something back. Marcus noticed as well. Children ask honest questions, he said. Adults usually teach them complicated answers. Before Ryan could respond, his cell phone vibrated. He looked down. The caller identification displayed a number from County Headquarters. Ryan answered immediately. The voice on the other end sounded unusually serious. Ryan, remain where you are. That is what dispatch said. Good. Do not release the driver. Ryan straightened slightly. Why? Several seconds passed. We are still trying to understand that ourselves. The call ended. Ryan stared at the phone. For the first time that evening, genuine confusion replaced suspicion. Headquarters did not know. Dispatch did not know. Yet everyone seemed convinced the stop needed to continue. He looked back toward Marcus. The older man was watching the American flag, attached to a nearby highway service sign. The fabric moved gently against the dark sky. Something tells me this is not about a traffic stop anymore, Ryan said. Marcus turned toward him. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful. Maybe it never was. The answer sent a chill through Ryan that had nothing to do with the weather. Far away, in offices neither man could see, more phones continued ringing. Names were being mentioned. Files were being opened. Decisions were being made. And while the small crowd near the highway grew increasingly curious, none of them realized that the ordinary-looking man standing beside the old pickup truck was at the center of a chain of events moving rapidly toward their location. The first drops of rain finally began to fall, tapping softly against the hood of Marcus Walker's pickup truck and the roof of Ryan Mitchell's patrol car. Neither man moved. The highway continued humming with distant traffic while dark clouds stretched across the night sky like a blanket pulled over the horizon. Ryan checked his watch. What should have been a routine stop had already lasted far longer than normal. Yet every instruction from dispatch, headquarters, and the unexpected phone calls pointed in the same direction. Stay. Wait. Do not let the driver leave. The problem was that nobody seemed able to explain why. Marcus looked toward the rain and smiled faintly. Looks like we are finally getting that storm. Ryan followed his gaze. Looks that way. Another moment of silence passed. The little camper remained parked in the turnout across the highway. The young girl was still watching through the window while her parents occasionally exchanged curious glances. A few additional vehicles had slowed as they passed. Nothing dramatic was happening, but the flashing patrol lights naturally attracted attention. Ryan returned to the pickup truck and glanced through the windshield. The small metal object on the dashboard caught his eye again. This time he stepped closer. It was not decorative. It appeared to be some kind of military challenge coin displayed on a stand. The surface reflected the patrol lights. Ryan could not read the engraving from outside, but the craftsmanship looked unusually detailed. You collect those? He asked. Marcus looked at the coin. Not really. Someone gave it to you? Marcus nodded once. A long time ago. Ryan waited for more explanation. None came. The older man had a way of answering questions without actually expanding on them. It was not evasive. It was simply economical. Somewhere beneath that calm exterior, Marcus seemed completely comfortable allowing silence to exist. Ryan was not. His radio suddenly crackled again. Unit 12. Ryan grabbed the microphone. Go ahead. The dispatcher hesitated before speaking. A representative from State Command may be contacting you directly. Ryan blinked. State Command. That is correct. For a traffic stop? Another pause followed. Just remain where you are. The transmission ended. Ryan stared at the radio. State Command. Nothing about this situation made sense anymore. He stepped out of the patrol vehicle and looked toward Marcus. The veteran's expression had not changed. Rainwater rolled from the brim of his faded cap. You seem less surprised than I am, Ryan said. Marcus chuckled softly. Life teaches you that unusual things happen. You knew something like this was coming? No, Marcus shook his head. But I learned years ago that worrying rarely changes the outcome. Ryan opened his mouth to reply when headlights appeared far down the highway. At first they seemed ordinary. Then he noticed there were several vehicles traveling together. They maintained equal spacing as they moved through the darkness. The formation looked deliberate, professional. Ryan narrowed his eyes. The vehicles were still miles away, but something about them immediately captured his attention. Across the highway, even the family in the camper seemed to notice. The little girl pointed toward the distant lights. The rain continued falling lightly as the line of vehicles drew closer. Ryan felt a strange tension forming in his chest. Not fear. Anticipation. Every strange call. Every unexplained instruction. Every unanswered question seemed connected to whatever was approaching through the darkness. Beside him, Marcus simply watched the road. His posture remained relaxed. His breathing remained steady. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the wet pavement while the distant convoy gradually emerged from the stormy night, carrying answers neither Ryan nor the growing number of observers were prepared to hear. The line of headlights continued growing larger through the rain. Ryan Mitchell stepped closer to the edge of the highway, trying to understand what he was seeing. The vehicles moved with unusual precision. 3 dark SUVs followed by a larger black vehicle maintained identical spacing as they approached. Their headlights reflected across the wet pavement like streaks of white fire. Around them, traffic naturally shifted aside. Drivers seemed to sense the convoy's importance even without understanding why. Ryan looked back toward Marcus Walker. The veteran stood beside his truck with his hands resting comfortably in the pockets of his denim jacket. Rain tapped softly against the brim of his faded military cap. If he felt surprised by the approaching convoy, he did not show it. Do you know them? Ryan asked. Marcus looked toward the road. I do not know who is in those vehicles. The answer was technically clear, yet somehow incomplete. Ryan noticed that immediately. Before he could ask another question, his cell phone rang again. This time the caller identification displayed a number he had never seen before. He answered quickly. Officer Mitchell. The voice on the other end sounded older and unusually formal. Confirm the driver is still present. Ryan glanced at Marcus. Yes, sir. Good. Can somebody explain what is happening? Several seconds passed. Soon. The line disconnected. Ryan lowered the phone and stared at it in disbelief. Every person who contacted him seemed to know more than he did. Across the highway, the family inside the camper remained parked. The little girl had now convinced her parents to step outside beneath the shelter of the vehicle's awning. They watched the approaching convoy with growing curiosity. Even Marcus seemed to notice them. People always gather when they think they are about to witness something important, he said. Ryan looked at him. And are they? Marcus smiled faintly. That depends on what they learn. The convoy finally exited the highway and entered a nearby service road. Ryan felt his pulse quicken slightly. The first SUV slowed before stopping several yards behind the patrol vehicle. The others followed. Rainwater splashed beneath their tires. For a brief moment, nobody emerged. The engines remained running. The headlights illuminated the roadside scene with harsh white light. Then a door opened. Not on the first vehicle. On the second, a man in a dark suit stepped out holding a phone to his ear. Another followed from the third vehicle. Neither appeared military. Neither appeared law enforcement. Yet both moved with a sense of purpose Ryan instantly recognized. They spoke briefly before looking toward Marcus. Not toward him. Toward Marcus. Ryan noticed that detail immediately. The suited men exchanged a few words before one of them approached. "Officer Mitchell?" Ryan nodded. "Yes." The man extended a hand. "Thank you for remaining on scene." Ryan shook it automatically. "Can someone tell me what this is about?" The man looked toward Marcus. "We are still waiting for one more vehicle." Ryan followed his gaze. The larger black vehicle at the rear of the convoy had not moved. Its doors remained closed. Rain continued falling lightly as everyone waited. Marcus seemed perfectly at ease. The suited officials appeared respectful. The growing audience across the highway watched in silence. Ryan felt like the only person present who did not understand the situation. Then another call came through his radio. Dispatch sounded noticeably different this time. More careful. More formal. Unit 12, State Command has requested that you extend every professional courtesy to Mr. Walker. Ryan froze. For a second he thought he had misheard. Repeat that. State Command requests every professional courtesy be extended to Mr. Walker. The transmission ended. Ryan slowly turned toward Marcus. The veteran met his gaze calmly. The rain continued falling between them. And for the first time since the traffic stop began, Ryan realized the mystery was no longer about what Marcus might have done. The mystery was about who Marcus Walker truly was. Ryan Mitchell could not stop thinking about the dispatcher's last words. Every professional courtesy be extended to Mr. Walker. The sentence echoed inside his mind while rain continued falling across the highway shoulder. Just an hour earlier, Marcus Walker had seemed like an ordinary driver in an old pickup truck. Now State Command was issuing unusual instructions. Unidentified officials were standing nearby, and a convoy had arrived from somewhere beyond the county. Yet Marcus himself appeared unchanged. He remained beside the truck with the same calm expression he had worn since the beginning of the stop. The larger black vehicle at the rear of the convoy remained closed. Whatever answers Ryan had been waiting for seemed to be inside. One of the suited officials checked his watch before speaking quietly into an earpiece. Another approached Marcus. "Sorry for the delay, sir." Ryan noticed the word immediately. "Sir. Not Mr. Not Mr. Walker. Sir." Marcus nodded politely. "Weather is slowing everyone down." The official smiled. "Yes, sir." Ryan glanced between them. The interaction felt natural, as though the two men had known each other for years. Across the highway, the family continued watching. The little girl stood beneath the camper awning holding a blanket around her shoulders. Even from a distance, her curiosity was obvious. More vehicles slowed as they passed. Some drivers looked briefly before continuing down the road. Others lingered longer. The flashing patrol lights, dark SUVs, and gathering officials created a scene. Impossible to ignore. A gust of wind swept across the shoulder, carrying rain sideways. Marcus looked toward the American flag attached to the nearby service sign. The fabric snapped sharply before settling again. For several seconds he simply watched it move. Ryan found himself doing the same. "You spent a long time in the military, did you not?" Ryan asked. Marcus kept his eyes on the flag. "A long time." "Army." Marcus nodded. "Yes." Ryan waited. "That is all you are going to tell me?" A faint smile appeared on Marcus's face. "You never actually asked before." Ryan almost laughed despite the tension. The older man had a point. Throughout the stop, Ryan had focused more on his suspicions than on the person standing in front of him. Before he could respond, the rear vehicle finally opened. Every conversation stopped. Even the suited officials turned toward it. Ryan instinctively straightened his posture. A tall uniformed officer stepped out first and moved to the side. Then another. Neither spoke. They simply waited. Rainwater glistened across the black paint of the vehicle. The atmosphere changed immediately. Not because anyone had issued commands. Not because anyone looked intimidating. Something about the quiet professionalism radiating from the group demanded attention. Ryan felt it instantly. Marcus remained calm. Yet for the first time that evening, Ryan noticed something different in his expression. Not nervousness. Respect. Genuine respect. Whoever was arriving mattered to Marcus. The realization struck Ryan harder than he expected. Headquarters had been confused. Dispatch had been careful. State Command had intervened. Officials had driven through a storm to reach a roadside traffic stop. And now even Marcus Walker appeared prepared for the arrival. The door remained open for several seconds before a figure finally emerged. Ryan could not yet see the person's face clearly through the rain and lights. But he saw the uniform. He saw the insignia. And he immediately understood why phones had been ringing across multiple offices all night. Around them, the rain continued falling softly while every person on that stretch of highway seemed to hold their breath at exactly the same moment. The figure stepped fully into the rain, and for a moment the entire roadside seemed to freeze. Ryan Mitchell had never seen so many people become silent at the same time. The suited officials straightened immediately. The uniformed personnel near the vehicle shifted their posture. Even the distant family beneath the camper awning appeared to sense that something important was happening. Rainwater shimmered beneath the convoy headlights while the man walked forward with measured confidence. His uniform left little room for misunderstanding. The insignia on his shoulders reflected the surrounding lights. Ryan had seen those stars before, but only in photographs, ceremonies, and official broadcasts. Never standing 20 feet away on the shoulder of a highway. The realization hit him instantly. This was not a senior officer. This was a general. Ryan felt his pulse accelerate. The general walked directly past the suited officials. He did not stop to acknowledge the convoy. He did not look toward the patrol car. His attention remained fixed on one person. Marcus Walker. The veteran removed his hands from his jacket pockets and stood a little straighter. Not out of fear. Out of respect. The general reached him and smiled. Marcus. The older man's face softened. Thomas. Ryan blinked. Thomas. Not general. Not sir. Thomas. The familiarity stunned him. The general extended his hand, but Marcus ignored it and pulled him into a brief embrace instead. Several people watching exchanged surprised looks. The general laughed quietly. Still doing things your own way. Some habits survive retirement, Marcus replied. The rain continued falling gently around them. Ryan struggled to process what he was seeing. A 4-star general had driven through a storm to meet a man he had stopped on the side of the road. More importantly, they clearly knew each other well. The general stepped back and looked Marcus over. You look exactly the same. Marcus smiled. You need stronger glasses. Several people laughed softly. Even Ryan felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. Yet his confusion only deepened. The general finally turned toward him. Ryan. Immediately straightened. Officer Mitchell. Yes, sir. Thank you for remaining with Mr. Walker. Ryan hesitated. Of course, sir. The general studied him for a moment before nodding politely. There was no anger in his expression. No accusation. Only professionalism. Somehow that made Ryan feel more uncomfortable. He glanced toward Marcus again. The veteran seemed completely at ease. Across the highway, the little girl stared wide-eyed at the unfolding scene. Her mother appeared equally fascinated. Nearby, one of the suited officials approached carrying a waterproof folder. We finally found him, the man said with visible relief. The general laughed. He was never hiding. Marcus shrugged. I was driving home. The statement sounded so ordinary that several people smiled. Yet Ryan noticed something else. Nobody treated Marcus like an ordinary citizen. The officials listened carefully when he spoke. The general respected him. Everyone seemed genuinely relieved to have located him. The veteran glanced toward the highway and then toward the flag moving in the rain. This seems like a lot of effort for an old man in a pickup truck. The general shook his head. You know better than that. Ryan watched the exchange carefully. There was history between them. Years of it. Shared experiences. Shared memories. Whatever connected these two men extended far beyond military rank. The storm clouds continued rolling overhead while headlights reflected across the wet pavement. Around them, the highway carried on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet standing there beneath the rain, Ryan realized the night had crossed an invisible line. The mystery was no longer whether Marcus Walker mattered. That question had already been answered. The real mystery now was understanding why a general, state command, multiple officials, and an entire chain of government offices seemed willing to move heaven and earth simply to find one quiet man driving an old pickup truck home. Rain continued falling in a steady rhythm across the highway shoulder, while the strange gathering remained frozen between curiosity and revelation. Ryan Mitchell stood beside his patrol vehicle, watching General Thomas Hayes and Marcus Walker speak, as though they were old friends meeting after a long absence rather than two men reunited by a roadside traffic stop. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Only an hour earlier, Marcus had appeared to be nothing more than a quiet driver in an aging pickup truck. Now senior officials treated his arrival and departure as though it carried national importance. One of the suited representatives finally opened the waterproof folder he had been carrying and approached Marcus. "Sir, we have been trying to reach you all afternoon." Marcus looked mildly embarrassed. "My phone battery died." The official blinked. "Your phone battery died?" Marcus nodded. "That happens when you forget the charger." Several people nearby exchanged amused looks. Ryan could hardly believe what he was hearing. Multiple agencies had apparently spent hours trying to locate Marcus, and the reason they failed was because of a dead phone battery. Even General Hayes laughed. "Only you could create a statewide search operation because you forgot a charger." Marcus shrugged. "I never claimed to be organized." The general accepted the answer with a smile before becoming slightly more serious. The ceremony was moved forward. Marcus sighed softly. "I was afraid of that." Ryan listened carefully. Ceremony. The word immediately caught his attention. Until now, every possibility that had crossed his mind involved investigations, security issues, or classified operations. A ceremony sounded entirely different. "You really were not told?" the general asked. Marcus shook his head. "I left before the final call." The suited official carefully removed several documents from the folder. Rain tapped against the protective cover as he handed them over. Marcus glanced through the pages. His expression remained calm, but Ryan noticed something change in his eyes. Not surprise. Reflection. Memory. The general looked toward the highway before speaking quietly. "They finally approved it." Marcus stared at the papers for several seconds. "After all these years." "After all these years," the general confirmed. Ryan could not see the documents clearly, but he sensed their importance immediately. Across the highway, the little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve again. This time her mother simply smiled and nodded, as if admitting she had no idea what was happening either. The mystery had become larger than everyone present. Marcus slowly closed the folder. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his cap. "A lot of good people should be standing there with me." The general's expression softened. "Many of them cannot." Marcus looked toward the dark horizon. "I know." Silence followed. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that exists when people share memories too large for easy conversation. Ryan felt something inside him shift. For hours he had been searching for a reason to justify his suspicions. Now he was beginning to understand that he had spent almost no time trying to understand the man himself. The general finally turned toward Ryan again. "Officer Mitchell, do you know why everyone has been looking for Mr. Walker?" Ryan answered honestly. "No, sir." The general glanced at Marcus before responding. "Because tomorrow morning the nation intends to recognize one of its most respected veterans." Ryan stared at him. The words settled over the roadside like another wave of rain. Veteran. Recognition. Ceremony. Suddenly every strange phone call, every alert, every official vehicle made far more sense. Yet Ryan suspected this was still only part of the story. Marcus looked down at the folder in his hands. The general looked at him with unmistakable admiration. And standing beneath the flashing patrol lights, Ryan realized that whatever Marcus Walker had done during his years of service, the truth was far bigger than anyone on that highway had imagined. For several seconds nobody spoke. The rain seemed quieter somehow, as though even the storm had paused to listen. Ryan Mitchell stood beside his patrol car trying to absorb what General Thomas Hayes had just revealed. One of the nation's most respected veterans. The words refused to fit the image he had built in his mind earlier that evening. He looked toward Marcus Walker again. The older man remained exactly as he had been from the beginning. Same faded cap. Same worn denim jacket. Same weathered pickup truck. Nothing about him appeared extraordinary. Yet every person who had arrived treated him with a level of respect Ryan could not ignore. The general noticed Ryan's expression and smiled slightly. "You are wondering what he did?" Ryan answered honestly. "Yes, sir." Marcus shook his head immediately. "Thomas." The general laughed. "You see? This is what he does." Ryan looked confused. "Sir." Every time someone tries to talk about his accomplishments, he changes the subject. Marcus shrugged. "Because they were never mine alone." One of the officials standing nearby nodded. "That answer is exactly why people respect him." The general glanced toward the convoy before returning his attention to Ryan. 23 years ago, there was an operation overseas that went wrong. Marcus immediately looked down. The general noticed and softened his tone. "I know you do not like these stories, but they matter." Rainwater slid from the edge of the general's uniform cap as he continued. "A lot of young soldiers were stranded in a situation that should have ended very differently. Communication failed. Conditions deteriorated. People started losing hope." Ryan listened carefully. Around them, even the suited officials seemed focused on the story. "Marcus was not the highest-ranking person there," the general continued. "He was not the one giving orders. He was simply the man who refused to leave people behind." Marcus looked away toward the highway lights. The general smiled faintly. For 3 days he carried responsibility that belonged to people above him. He kept everyone focused, kept everyone moving, kept everyone believing they would make it home. Ryan felt a strange tightening in his chest. The general was not describing medals or titles. He was describing character. "A lot of those young soldiers went on to become leaders," the general said quietly. "Some became commanders. Some became teachers. Some became parents and grandparents. Many of them are alive because one man refused to quit when quitting would have been easier." Silence followed. The rain continued falling softly across the roadside. Marcus remained uncomfortable with the attention. Ryan could see it clearly. There was no pride in his expression, no attempt to impress anyone. If anything, the veteran seemed eager for the conversation to end. "There were a lot of good people there," Marcus finally said. "And many of them credit you for getting them home," the general replied. Across the highway, the family near the camper remained completely still. The little girl was listening even though she could not hear every word. She only saw the faces, the respect, the emotion. Sometimes that was enough. Ryan slowly realized something else. Throughout the entire stop, Marcus had never once mentioned any of this. Not when questioned, not when delayed, not when treated with suspicion. He could have ended the uncertainty with a single sentence. Instead, he had simply remained patient. The realization landed harder than any revelation about military honors. Because standing there in the rain, Ryan finally understood that the most remarkable thing about Marcus Walker was not what he had done decades ago. It was who he still chose to be today. The rain began to ease, leaving only a soft mist drifting above the highway. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the wet pavement while the unusual gathering remained gathered around a man who seemed increasingly uncomfortable being the center of attention. Marcus Walker closed the folder and held it against his side. General Thomas Hayes watched him for a moment before smiling knowingly. "You are thinking about leaving before sunrise tomorrow." Marcus laughed quietly. "You know me too well." "I do." The general folded his arms. "And that is exactly why we spent half the day trying to find you." Several of the officials nearby smiled. Ryan Mitchell noticed something remarkable. Despite the respect everyone showed Marcus, nobody treated him like a celebrity. They treated him like family, like someone whose character mattered more than his accomplishments. The difference was impossible to miss. One of the suited representatives stepped forward. "Sir, there are people already arriving for the ceremony." Marcus sighed softly. "That many? More than expected. I was hoping for a quiet room and a short speech." General Hayes laughed. "You spent 20 years avoiding recognition. You have lost the right to be surprised when people ignore that request." A few people chuckled. Even Ryan smiled. For the first time all evening, the atmosphere felt lighter. Yet beneath that warmth, Ryan felt a growing sense of regret. He replayed the beginning of the traffic stop in his mind. The assumptions, the suspicion, The certainty that he understood the situation before learning anything about the man standing in front of him. He remembered Marcus calmly suggesting that he might want to call a supervisor. At the time it had sounded like an excuse. Now it sounded like kindness. Marcus had known long before anyone else arrived that the situation would eventually correct itself. Yet he had chosen patience instead of confrontation. The realization stayed with Ryan. Across the highway, the family finally crossed toward the service road. They stayed respectfully distant, but the little girl could no longer contain her curiosity. She looked toward Marcus and then toward the general. Her mother appeared embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said. "She keeps asking questions." Marcus smiled warmly. Questions are usually a good thing. The little girl hesitated before speaking. "Are you famous?" Several adults exchanged amused looks. Marcus thought about the question carefully. "No," she pointed toward the convoy. "Then why did all these people come for you?" The roadside became unexpectedly quiet. Ryan watched Marcus's expression. The veteran looked toward the general, then toward the officials, then back toward the child. "Because a lot of good people are being very kind tonight," he answered. The girl considered that answer. "Did you do something important?" Marcus smiled gently. "I tried to help people when they needed help." The child nodded as though that explanation made perfect sense. Then she smiled. "My dad says that is what heroes do." Marcus looked away briefly. Ryan noticed the emotion in his eyes. Not pride. Humility. The kind that came from carrying memories nobody else fully understood. General Hayes placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You see," he said quietly. "Even children understand it." The veteran shook his head with a small smile. The mist drifted across the highway while distant headlights moved through the darkness. Around them, the tension that had dominated the evening was disappearing. In its place came something else. Understanding. And standing beside his patrol car, Ryan realized that the biggest lesson of the night had nothing to do with military honors, government officials, or ceremonies. It was the simple realization that character often hides beneath ordinary appearances, and that some of the strongest people in the world never feel the need to tell anyone who they are. The convoy remained parked along the service road while the last traces of rain drifted away into the darkness. The highway looked calmer now. Water glistened across the pavement, reflecting patrol lights, headlights, and the distant glow of roadside signs. What had begun as an ordinary traffic stop had transformed into something entirely different. Yet Marcus Walker seemed determined to keep the evening as ordinary as possible. He thanked the family who had wandered over from the camper. He shook hands with the officials who had spent hours trying to locate him. He even asked one of the drivers from the convoy whether he had eaten dinner yet. Ryan Mitchell noticed that detail immediately. Marcus never positioned himself at the center of attention. Instead, he redirected attention toward everyone around him. The general appeared to notice the same thing. "That is why people follow him," General Thomas Hayes said quietly as he stood beside Ryan. Ryan glanced toward him. "Because of what he did during his service?" The general smiled. "Partly." His eyes followed Marcus as the veteran spoke with the little girl and her parents. "But achievements fade. Stories fade. What remains is how people make others feel." Ryan thought about that. Across the road, Marcus was kneeling slightly so he could speak to the child at eye level. There was no audience there. No cameras. No reporters. No reason to perform. He was simply being kind. The general folded his arms. "Do you know how many people called today when they learned we could not reach him?" Ryan shook his head. "No, sir. More than I can count." The general laughed softly. "Retired commanders. Former soldiers. Families. Teachers. Business owners. People from every part of the country." Ryan looked surprised. "All because his phone battery died? All because they care about him?" The answer lingered in the cool night air. Ryan watched Marcus stand and shake the father's hand. The veteran's movements carried a quiet confidence that now made perfect sense. Not because of rank. Not because of recognition. Because he knew exactly who he was. Ryan suddenly remembered the beginning of the stop. The assumptions he had made when he first saw the old truck. The way he had interpreted Marcus's calmness as suspicious. The way he had spent more time examining the vehicle than understanding the driver. Each memory felt heavier now. The general seemed to sense his thoughts. You are not the first person to misjudge him. Ryan looked down briefly. That does not make it feel any better. Good. Ryan looked up, surprised by the response. The general's expression remained gentle. The day mistakes stop bothering us is the day we stop learning from them. Nearby, Marcus finished speaking with the family. The little girl waved enthusiastically before returning toward the camper with her parents. The veteran watched them go with a small smile. Then he turned and noticed Ryan standing alone beside the patrol car. For a moment neither man moved. Ryan knew what he needed to do. The realization had been growing inside him for the last hour. Not because of the convoy. Not because of the general. Not because of the ceremony. Because of everything he had learned about Marcus himself. The officer slowly walked across the wet pavement. The sounds of traffic filled the background. Water dripped from roadside signs. The night felt quieter than before. Marcus waited patiently as Ryan approached. There was no judgment in his eyes. No resentment. Only calm understanding. Somehow that made the conversation more difficult. Ryan stopped a few feet away and took a breath. Around them, the officials continued their preparations. The convoy remained parked beneath the fading storm clouds. Yet in that moment, none of it felt as important as the simple truth Ryan finally understood. Before the night ended, he would need to confront the assumptions he had carried into the stop. And more importantly, he would need to decide what kind of officer he wanted to be when the sun rose tomorrow morning. Ryan Mitchell stopped a few feet from Marcus Walker, and for the first time that evening he found himself struggling to find the right words. The flashing lights that had dominated the roadside for hours now seemed less important. The convoy, the officials, even the approaching ceremony felt distant compared to the simple conversation standing in front of him. Marcus waited patiently. He did not rush him. He did not fill the silence. He simply stood beside his old pickup truck while the cool night air carried the scent of rain-soaked pavement across the highway. Ryan finally spoke. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at him quietly. For what? The question surprised Ryan. You know for what? Marcus studied him for a moment. Tell me anyway. Ryan glanced toward the road before meeting the veteran's eyes again. Because I made assumptions before I knew anything about you. I saw an old truck. I saw a black man traveling alone at night. I convinced myself there had to be something suspicious. I kept looking for reasons to justify that feeling instead of looking at the facts. The words felt heavier once spoken aloud. Nearby, General Thomas Hayes remained respectfully silent. The officials did the same. Nobody interrupted. Marcus listened carefully. That is an honest answer, he said. Ryan shook his head. It is not a good one. Marcus smiled faintly. Honest is usually where improvement starts. The response caught Ryan off guard. He had expected disappointment, perhaps frustration. Instead, Marcus offered understanding. You are not angry? Ryan asked. Marcus looked toward the dark highway stretching into the distance. I spent many years meeting people who decided who I was before learning my name. Ryan lowered his eyes. The truth of those words landed immediately. Marcus continued. If I carried anger from every one of those moments, I would have spent my life carrying a very heavy load. The general nodded quietly. Ryan felt something shift inside him. The veteran was giving him something he had not earned. Grace. Not because the mistake was insignificant. Not because it never happened. But because Marcus refused to allow bitterness to control his life. Across the highway, the family began preparing to leave. The little girl waved one final time. Marcus smiled and waved back. The simple gesture somehow said more about him than any military story ever could. Ryan looked toward the veteran again. I want to be better than I was tonight. Marcus chuckled softly. That is good. That is all. Ryan asked. You are not going to give me some life-changing speech? The older man laughed. Those rarely work. Even Ryan smiled. Marcus pointed toward the patrol car. Tomorrow you will stop another vehicle. You will meet another stranger. That is when the lesson matters. Not tonight. Ryan followed his gaze toward the patrol lights reflecting across the wet pavement. He understood exactly what Marcus meant. Character was not measured by one apology. It was measured by what happened afterward. General Hayes finally stepped forward. That may be the most useful leadership advice you received this year. Ryan nodded slowly. I believe it. The mist continued drifting above the highway while the storm finally moved beyond the horizon. The tension that had begun the evening was completely gone now. In its place stood something quieter and far more meaningful. Respect. Not the kind earned through rank, titles, or recognition. The kind earned through patience, humility, and the ability to treat others with dignity, even when they failed to offer the same in return. Standing beneath the fading glow of the patrol lights, Ryan realized that Marcus Walker had taught him more during a traffic stop than any training course ever had. And the most remarkable part was that Marcus never once tried to teach a lesson. He simply lived it. The convoy eventually began preparing to leave, but nobody seemed eager to end the night. The storm had passed completely now. Above the highway, the clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of clear sky where a few stars had begun to appear. The wet pavement reflected the remaining lights like scattered glass. Marcus Walker stood beside his pickup truck holding the folder under one arm while General Thomas Hayes spoke quietly with several officials. The family from the camper had already returned to the highway. Their taillights disappeared into the darkness, carrying with them a story they would probably tell for years. Ryan Mitchell remained near his patrol car, watching everything unfold. Yet his attention kept returning to Marcus. Not because of the ceremony waiting the next morning. Not because of the military recognition. Because the veteran still looked exactly the same as when the night began. Same truck. Same jacket. Same calm expression. Nothing about him had changed. The only thing that had changed was what everyone else now understood. The general eventually approached Marcus one final time. We should get moving, he said. Marcus nodded. You know I was already heading home. Not tonight. The general smiled. Tomorrow is too important. Marcus looked unconvinced. That depends who you ask. Several people laughed. Even now, he seemed uncomfortable discussing himself. The general shook his head affectionately. Some things never change. Marcus extended his hand. The general ignored it and embraced him briefly. See you in the morning. See you in the morning, Marcus replied. One by one, the officials returned to their vehicles. Doors closed. Engines started. The convoy slowly began organizing itself for departure. The roadside suddenly felt quieter. Smaller. More ordinary. Ryan watched as Marcus opened the driver's door of his pickup truck. Before climbing inside, the veteran paused and looked toward him. Officer Mitchell. Ryan stepped forward. Yes, sir. Marcus smiled. Drive safe tonight. Ryan almost laughed. After everything that had happened, those were the words Marcus chose. Not a lecture. Not a reminder. Not a final lesson. Just simple kindness. You too, Ryan answered. Marcus nodded once and climbed into the truck. The engine started with the familiar sound of an old vehicle that had traveled many miles. For a moment, Ryan stood there watching. The convoy vehicles pulled onto the highway first. Marcus waited patiently before following behind them. The old pickup merged onto the road and disappeared into the night alongside people who clearly respected him. Within minutes, the flashing patrol lights reflected only against empty pavement. The service road grew quiet again. Ryan remained standing beside his car long after everyone had gone. The cool air carried the scent of rain and fresh asphalt. Somewhere beyond the darkness, Marcus was continuing his journey home. Tomorrow the nation would honor him. Reporters would tell his story. Officials would recognize his service. Yet Ryan suspected none of those things represented the most important truth. The greatest lesson of the night was not what Marcus Walker had accomplished decades earlier. It was the dignity he carried every day afterward. As Ryan finally returned to his patrol car, he looked once more toward the empty highway. Earlier that evening he had seen an old truck and made assumptions. Now he saw something different whenever he remembered that moment. He saw a reminder that character cannot be measured by appearance, that respect should never depend on status, and that some of the strongest people in the world quietly carry their greatness without ever feeling the need to announce it. The highway stretched into the darkness ahead. Ryan started the engine and pulled onto the road. Somewhere beneath the clearing sky, a lesson would travel with him for the rest of his life.